Hello everybody, welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around Fantasy Premier League. My name's Such.
And my name is James.
Today is a people's poll, James, and it's not about Fantasy Premier League. The world doesn't always revolve around it.
No, it's definitely not today. We picked two fairly big topics of conversation for this week's people's poll. There was really no point putting a third in. That vote went out on Monday to give us plenty of time to know which one we was going to be doing for you guys. And obviously, since the poll went out, things changed a little bit, which is almost inevitable.
Yeah.
So the two options in the poll was the use of gambling advertisements within the FPL community, which is something we'll be covering on our Patreon today. But the winner of the poll was obviously the situation involving Mason Greenwood at Manchester United. That poll, as I said, went out around about 10 o'clock on Monday morning, at which point Mason Greenwood was essentially, I was going to say part of Manchester United's first team, that would be incorrect, but it was still up for deliberation what sort of decision Manchester United were going to come to. We was expecting that announcement to follow soon, and I think at that point as well, we was possibly expecting Manchester United to say that Mason Greenwood would be reintegrated into the first team squad. Later that day, midway through the poll, Manchester United released a statement obviously saying that will no longer be the case. We're obviously still going to cover it. Timeline of what's happened, the important role that people like Adam Crafton from The Athletic have played during this process is an amazing piece of journalism that he's done. And what happens obviously next, how Manchester United have come to their conclusion and what essentially is now a U-turn, because it wasn't the plan by the looks of things. It looks like the plan was to reintegrate Greenwood.
No, exactly. When we were talking about what to put in the poll, obviously the feeling was that Mason Greenwood was going to be back at Manchester United, and we would be having a conversation within that context. So the fact that they've now obviously mutually terminated his contract and he's free to go does change things a little bit, because they have finally taken action. But we should kind of add it's best part of 6 months since the charges were dropped by the Crown Prosecution Service. Get my words out in England. So it's been quite a while since we've known that there is not going to be any criminal case against Mason Greenwood. I know a lot of people are a bit upset with the wording of some of the statements that have come out from his lawyers and from his side, kind of indicating that he's innocent, basically, or saying that he was cleared, which is not actually the case. I think we do need to be clear that the case was dropped.
Yeah,
because
in Greenwood's own statement, he says charges were dropped. Charges were not dropped. He was cleared of charges. The charges were dropped.
But the charges were dropped. Sorry. Exactly that. So there was a case of that they didn't feel that they were going to get a conviction, and I think that kind of is a big problem with the whole domestic abuse and domestic violence situation. Like, I mean, we were looking at it, and I know a lot of people have kind of put the numbers out there, but is it any surprise that the charges were dropped when less than 2%, this is back in 2012 data, 2022 data, go to conviction, like less than 2%. So the bar of evidence that's needed for these cases to go through is pretty high, and unfortunately, if you don't have the victims who are willing to be witnesses in court, then it's nigh on impossible for the Crown Prosecution Service to get a conviction, and it's a lot of resource and money that they would have had to spend on convicting the case. Like, if you think about the high-profile nature of Mason Greenwood and the media interest and everything, we're talking millions. They've obviously decided that it's not going to be possible to get a conviction, but he wasn't cleared, and I think a lot of people are upset with the phrasing of, well, he hasn't been proved guilty, so he should be allowed to carry on with his life and what have you. And it's a problem, yeah, like we said, with the domestic abuse and violence. Less than a quarter gets reported as well.
That's, one of the statistics. I think it's come from refuge.org.uk. They written it's under 24% of domestic abuse cases actually get reported.
Yeah. And
this got reported because it landed on social media on a Sunday morning, essentially.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think that's why a lot of people are very upset with the way that Manchester United have handled it really, and how long it's taken to get to this final conclusion, which so many people have felt was the final conclusion. It should have been the final conclusion months ago.
Yeah, look, I understand some of United's processes, and I'm certainly not here to defend the player or Manchester United in any, but I do understand the process of them as an employee with an employer, that they had to follow their own process. Whatever you think about that process, I understand that they had to go down that route, and obviously they didn't begin till obviously the CPS had obviously dropped their potential charges against Greenwood, so then they began their own investigation from there. They hadn't done anything before that. Obviously Greenwood had been suspended immediately by Manchester United when the original post went out, I think, on Instagram. There's a lot to be unhappy about the way they've handled this situation. It's common knowledge that they wanted to go down the route of reintegrating him. And as I said and I think on the deadline stream I did on Friday, I was asked a question. I'm 99% sure that's right. And I said then that I didn't think Manchester United were prepared for the shitstorm that was going to happen if they went down that route.
And they weren't.
No, and they weren't.
They clearly weren't.
And we're going to talk about some of those things during this process.
Yeah. I think it's worth for a lot of people that won't know the timeline of events of how it's unfolded over the last just over 18 months, going back to January 2022. It's worth kind of clarifying the timeline of how things unfolded, really.
Yeah, one thing before I do, obviously, to add is obviously the victim in this is the complainant, who we can't name, and that's fairly well publicised who that is, but we can't name. But that's where the sympathy of this story goes towards, is that person, and I wish that person the very best going forwards. Timeline. So January the 30th, 2022, Greenwood was arrested after audios, photographs and videos appeared from the accuser on Instagram. These were soon deleted afterwards, but not after a lot of people around the world had obviously seen and heard stuff. United suspended Greenwood later that day. The next day, Nike suspended their relationship with Mason Greenwood. He was also removed from FIFA 22. The following day, which was February the 1st, Greenwood further arrested on suspicion of sexual assault and threats to kill. The following day, on the 2nd, Greenwood was released on bail pending further investigation. On the 7th, Nike officially ended their sponsorship with Greenwood. On October the 15th, Greenwood was arrested again after an alleged breach of his bail conditions. The Crown Prosecution Service announced it's charging Greenwood with attempted rape, engaging in control of coercive behaviour and assault occasioning actual bodily harm. 2 days later, on October the 17th, Greenwood appeared at court. He only spoke to confirm his name, address and date of birth. 2 days afterwards, on October the 19th, Greenwood was granted bail and released from custody. On November the 21st, Greenwood appeared at court again. The hearing lasted 10 minutes. A trial date was set for November 2023. On February the 2nd, 2023, the charges against Mason Greenwood were dropped after the Crown Prosecution Service said that key witnesses withdrew their involvement and new material came to light. The Crown Prosecution Service said there was no longer a realistic prospect of conviction. On May the 30th, Erik ten Hag, the Manchester United manager, said it is not his decision on if Mason Greenwood would return to the team. On August the 12th, Manchester United delayed their final decision on Mason Greenwood's future. On August the 17th, United's investigation concluded, but the final decision was not made. Chief Executive Richard Arnold was being left responsible for that final decision. On August the 21st, which I'm pretty sure was Monday, Manchester United released a statement confirming Mason Greenwood will be allowed to leave to continue his career elsewhere, citing a mutual agreement.
Yeah,
that's the short timeline.
A fair rundown of the timeline. I think there's a few things that really kind of stood out when we were looking at it. In October last year, at that point, they felt they had enough evidence to charge him.
Yes.
Which would have been a significant amount of evidence. We've talked about how the bar is set so high with evidence that you need in these type of cases. So at that point, they would have felt that they had enough evidence to convict him, and so hence would have found him guilty. The retraction in February, I can understand if a key witness has taken a step back. Other new information has come to light is particularly vague.
We can't even speculate on it, right?
Exactly.
No one knows.
That I'm kind of like, well, it does get me thinking what other new information could possibly come to light when you've got such a clear idea of what could have happened back in October. And in terms of Erik ten Hag saying that it's not his choice whether he comes back into the team, I think he probably meant squad, because it's still Erik ten Hag would pick the 11 that were going to go out onto the pitch. Sure. So
the reports
it would have been a case of all Greenwood's in your squad, but Erik ten Hag could have still... The
reporting suggests that he wasn't against Greenwood returning to the squad.
Yeah. Erik ten Hag wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, like you said, Arnold was left with the final decision, and we got the statement on Monday.
Basically, I think it's worth covering quite a large chunk of primarily an article that Adam Crafton had kind of reposted and added to. Adam Crafton works for The Athletic and has done arguably one of the best bits of investigative journalism that I've probably ever seen, actually, and has been quite influential, I think, in terms of pushing a narrative back against Manchester United when Manchester United felt that they were in control. And Crafton has been helped by fellow journalists at The Athletic, which has pushed to get the real story of what's been going on behind the scenes at Manchester United into the public eye. As late as last Wednesday, which is 8 days ago from the time of this recording, United were still planning for the return of Mason Greenwood to come back into the squad. Last Thursday and Friday, according to Crafton, United had set time aside to explain to unhappy employees why Mason Greenwood would be returning to the first team squad. By Friday afternoon, the backlash from fans, supporters groups, even members of parliament speaking up, and charities that support female victims had forced essentially a rethink. United, following their own investigation, this investigation that began once the CPS had dropped the charges, believed that they, from their own investigation, they didn't have grounds to terminate Mason Greenwood's contract. I mean, that's quite important to get across from United's perspective. They didn't believe they had grounds just to essentially sack him.
Yep.
So they couldn't just go down that route. Statement on Monday obviously confirmed that United don't foresee any eventuality, including a return from a potential loan, if that's what happens, where Greenwood could play for Manchester United again. So United are prepared to help facilitate Greenwood in terms of helping him find a new club. It might be that it's a loan. There's a lot of kind of thought process at the moment from some people that United are trying to protect their asset, which I don't particularly agree with. But if he goes on loan to wherever and does well, and then Manchester United want to transfer him next summer, they're going to get more for the player than if they want to get now. It does feel slightly absurd to even be covering that sort of thing on this. But it might be that he goes out on loan and returns to United and goes somewhere else. But United have said they do not foresee any circumstances, no matter what, that Greenwood would play for United again. And to be honest, my opinion has always been that would have been an impossibility anyway. Where United have had some problems is in terms of wanting to release a statement of how they got this done. So basically the final decision came about on Friday night, once there was too much pressure elsewhere, but it was held back over the weekend because obviously United were playing at Tottenham on Saturday. And then obviously the ladies were playing in the Women's World Cup final on Sunday, and it certainly didn't seem appropriate, and it wouldn't have been to have released a statement on Sunday when the Lionesses, which include 3 players from Manchester United, were playing in the Women's World Cup final. There are, unfortunately, I think, Suj, echoes of United's bid to try and join the European Super League, which is a conversation we've obviously had in the past and will probably have again in the future. This idea of kind of going against whatever the public or fan opinion would have been and going on what they believed was right or beneficial, let's say maybe even for the football club, and then changed because of the public backlash. And obviously United were obviously not the only club that went forward in the Super League, but I think the whole process and the way United handled it has echoes of that.
Yeah, I don't think they expected that. I think we have to give the fans credit for voicing their opinion in the fact that they didn't want Mason Greenwood to come back. Yeah, you say that it was inevitable, but how often do we talk about situations where, so take for example Qatari takeover, and we talk about fans being fickle. when push comes to shove, they don't care. Give me the money and let's buy all the players that are available all around the world. And certain moral things they get put aside when it gets to that situation. Fans can often behave in the interests of the club and not think of the bigger picture with things like this. This is completely different.
There's two major differences, and so if you're trying to compare those teams, I think for say a Manchester United fan generally would be, and there are plenty that are against a potential Qatar takeover, and plenty who are potentially for it. Whatever it is, it's off the pitch.
Yep.
This is something that would have been directly in their eye line, if you will, and I think that's why it's very, very different as well. You couldn't look at him and not think about it.
No, exactly that. I think the point being that football fans can be pretty immoral. I don't want to call them immoral, but put those kind of things to one side when they just want to win games and stuff, and it suits. And they didn't in this situation.
This is also the case for the club.
Yep.
And it's not like, let's not pretend it was 500,000 people protesting at Old Trafford or anything like that. But let's say enough noise.
There was definitely enough noise to force the hand.
There will 100% be people out there who support Manchester United who think he should play for them. Again, I've spent a lot of the last week blocking a lot of people who said that sort of thing. I think those people probably need to give their head a wobble a little bit if the most important thing for them is the benefit of the team because they think this player would improve them. Like, I cannot understand that. Greenwood is on a reported 75,000 per week.
Yep.
Pound, I should say. That runs to 2025, obviously the summer. He has been getting paid throughout this whole process. So he's not short in the pocket from that perspective. Getting paid the same as he would have bar, I don't know, goal bonuses or whatever stuff would come from playing on the pitch. The internal investigation following the Crown Prosecution Service dropping charges, again, this is all information posted, obviously through The Athletic and Adam Crafton, was led by Chief Executive Richard Arnold, Legal Counsel Patrick Stewart, Communications Chief Ellie Norman, Football Director John Merton, Chief Operating Officer Colette Broch. At the conclusion, the view was that Mason Greenwood should return to the first team squad. The complainant did not have direct contact with Manchester United's investigation. Instead, United spoke with the complainant's mother. Both mother and complainant had the opportunity to correct Manchester United's findings from their own investigation. They did not. The complainant withdrew support to the investigation originally back in April 2022, which was approximately 3 months after the original stuff after the original stuff appeared on social media. So that's a long time ago. So it's April 2022. United was satisfied. Mason Greenwood did not physically abuse the complainant. There was no explanation, however, to the damning images and audio seen by many of the general public. United were also satisfied the complainant had not been subjected to coercive control from Greenwood.
I mean, those are very, very bold statements to make from an internal investigation by the club. Firstly, I think she could have corrected the statement but didn't, in a situation where she's clearly stopped being a witness for the CPS. She's not exactly then going to go and help Manchester United. Like, Manchester United in this, in my opinion, are as an investigative force probably less powerful than the police and CPS. So for them, and also for them to turn around and say that they don't think there was this physical abuse and so on without any explanation is a little bit disturbing. I'm like, okay,
Troubling
cool.
Look,
if you feel like he hasn't done it and you have enough evidence to say he didn't commit the physical and verbal abuse and all of this kind of stuff, be open about it. Like, if you really feel that way, be open about it. And then at least we can say, okay, I understand why you have made this decision or thought. But the fact that there's no explanation to that conclusion just is a bit, troubling. And I don't like it at all, if I'm honest with you.
Last Wednesday, The Athletic wrote to United at 9 a.m. in the morning on the 16th to tell them they were going to report that Arnold had briefed that Mason Greenwood would return to the first team squad. At 3:44 p.m. later that day, United released a statement saying that no decision had been made. Some staff at Manchester United internally discussed resigning or going on strike if Greenwood had returned. That does not surprise me in the slightest. This was the sort of thing I was referencing on Friday night in terms of I don't think United are prepared for what's about to come. It would not surprise me if employees there quite naturally would have felt extremely uncomfortable to work for that football club under those circumstances. And obviously you have to remember as well, not everybody at Manchester United earns the sort of salary that the footballers do, right?
Yep.
On Thursday the 17th, obviously the backlash began. Greenwood was discussed on Newsnight. Television presenter Rachel Riley was amongst those who said they would no longer support the football club if Greenwood returned. Arnold reportedly briefed during an executive leadership meeting back on August the 1st that the plan was to make an announcement of Greenwood returning on August the 4th. The intention on August the 3rd was to brief sponsors, the fan advisory board and the women's team of Greenwood's return. But obviously with the three ladies, Katie Zeller, Mary Earps and Ella Toon in Australia, obviously with the Lionesses, this was postponed. The Guardian reported on August the 11th that the Greenwood decision was delayed so United could consult those three ladies players who were at the World Cup. Following that, online threats were made to the three Lionesses, petitioning them to allow for Greenwood's return, which what these three ladies were meant to be judge and jury in people's eyes on social media, unfortunately. And as Yes said, there are people out there who obviously really wanted Greenwood to return. Female Fans Against Greenwood's Return was an account that was formed on August the 11th, a group of match-going United fans who then protested outside Old Trafford when United played Wolves on August the 14th. On August the 17th, charity Women's Aid wrote to United to express their concern with the situation. The Athletic reported further insider details on the same day, which included, quite astonishingly, the categorising of domestic abuse charities as being likely to be hostile to a Greenwood return, which is arguably in this circumstance the most absurd categorising of people that I might have ever heard, Suj.
Yep.
Women's Aid responded by tweeting, hostile is an inappropriate way to describe domestic and sexual abuse charities in stakeholder mapping, but especially in this case. By Friday evening, the pressure was so much that the decision makers and Richard Arnold deemed the situation intolerable, and the decision was made not to reintegrate Mason Greenwood into the first team squad.
Yep, and we find ourselves here.
Manchester United have come to their senses, but they don't deserve any praise for this process.
No, the lack of clarity and transparency, I think, is the word I'm really looking for, has been really frustrating from their side as well. One thing I can understand is the walking the fine line between what they can legally do and what they should morally do. That there is definitely employment law and contractual law that will have been in place. And sometimes I feel like they're making decisions to make sure they're covering the downside as much as possible, risk mitigation rather than actually doing the right thing or thinking about morals. And it's frustrating when organisations do that and try and just mitigate the downside and just make sure that they won't get themselves in any more trouble. The problem is the court of public opinion's there as well, and that impact can be bigger. And sometimes you have to be brave enough to make decisions that could end up backfiring, but it's the right thing to do.
Football, unfortunately, lost its moral compass an extremely long time ago.
That's very true.
That's not just a Manchester United thing, that's a football thing.
Well, the bigger the money's getting, the worse it's also getting, I would argue the case, potentially. Yeah.
One of the things people want to know, I think, is why is this case different to others? And again, there's certain names that we can't mention on this podcast, but are probably quite widely known within social media. Why is this case very different? Well, it's exactly that. This has become a public case, and the difference between Greenwood and some of the other cases is that this was seen / heard by a lot of people. People who are listening to this or watching this have heard or seen evidence themselves, which is extremely damning. And that's why this is different to many of the other cases with some of the other footballers.
Yep.
And And that's why this one hit harder, because it's one thing to read player X associated with situation Y. This one didn't need that. It was there. I can still remember that being the first thing I saw on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And so it struck particularly. My instinct to that immediately was that this person would never play football in this country again. And I think that's probably still likely to be the case. I hope that he, as an individual, obviously improves himself as a husband and a father, and gets reintegrated into society. You said something really interesting to me off camera the other day about he doesn't feel like he's served a punishment.
Well, this is it, right?
It really
the question is, would he play football in England again? And there's an idealist in me that would say, yes, he should be allowed to play football in England again, but, and you can't have the yes without the but. I suppose the idealist in me wants to believe in a justice system where if there's a crime, people are convicted, they serve a punishment. The punishment allows for their rehabilitation and reintegration back into society. And once they've served their time, people can move on and actually live a fulfilled and constructive life and be part of society. If that process happens, I feel like people should be allowed to, because there's people that commit all sorts of crimes that serve the punishment or the treatment or the rehabilitation, whatever is required, and can go on to be a part of society. The problem in this situation here is that there doesn't feel like there has been a punishment for the crime, whether it was legally or through the club. Now, the club have parted ways with.
His punishment has been not playing football. That's it.
I agree, but he's still getting paid throughout it and so on. So people will be
it's not a punishment.
Look, for someone who is a footballer, I'm sure not playing football has an impact on him, but it's not having a financial impact. And a lot of people will be like, well, he's just been on an 18-month paid holiday. So where is the actual punishment? And there hasn't been anything that's come out where there's any acknowledgement that, and I understand if he acknowledges it publicly that he has done wrong or that he needs treatment.
He said that he'd made mistakes.
Yeah. But then,
as far as it went, really.
It's then like, well, he's admitting to what he has done. So I feel like he's not wanting to say that because he doesn't want to admit to what he's done publicly.
I get that he couldn't admit publicly anything. I get that.
But if there was then the discussion, I'm going to go and get treatment. I've made changes. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And an understanding that there is an acknowledgement that he is wrong and a desire to want to get better and reintegrate into society and help, then I think the world would feel slightly differently about it and say, okay, well, this is different. But here, it just feels like it's all being done behind closed doors with no transparency about what's going on or understanding of where his head is at with it. The thing with that ideal, like that I described, where you've got a justice system that works in that way, is that in the real world it doesn't, which is proven by the fact that less than 2% of these cases get convicted because there's a lot of politics involved along the way of getting convictions and that kind of thing. So the idealist in me would want that to be the case. The realist in me knows that it's not likely to be the case. And so sometimes what the criminal system won't do, the club might have to do themselves, or the employer might have to do themselves.
Yeah. Do you think that Greenwood's football ability impacted United's stance?
I really, really, really want to say no to this question. I really, really want to say no. Manchester United made all of their decisions and all of their investigations not looking to protect their asset or the value of Mason Greenwood or anything to do with that. But I can't.
You can have an opinion here. So
yeah, I just don't feel like, I don't think that's the case. I'm sure there is a certain amount of protection of the asset is part of the decision-making process. I don't think it's a big part, clearly, because they've U-turned in the end. But I do think that there's a certain part of it is to do with making sure that they're protecting the asset.
Yes, I think it's okay to say that there's every chance if he wasn't high profile then, I mean, look, it doesn't get much more high profile than, to be honest with you, one of the most talented English footballers that's come through in a really long time. And obviously at Manchester United as well, it doesn't get more high profile than that, to be totally honest. So it probably has had an impact. And it's also, obviously, I would say, impacted even more so, I guess, coverage of it as well. It's not player X who's 35, who's in League Two or whatever. The coverage obviously would be different under that circumstance. Why do you think Richard Arnold was placed front and centre of the process rather than the people who own the football club?
I don't think they were involved in the decision making
at all.
My gut feel would be they would have left him to it. CEO, this is your job. Figure it out. Sort it out.
Do you think Arnold's position is untenable?
Is his position untenable? I mean,
I was about to say, he was bloody unlucky to walk into this shitstorm. Basically, was it 2 days after he took over from Ed Woodward?
Yeah. Is his position untenable? The clubs of Manchester United, businesses of Manchester United's size, have a board of directors. So as much as he is the face of it, I think if his position is untenable, if this decision has been taken at board level and it's a consensus, then everybody's position is untenable. I don't think it's one man, one decision. He's been put front and centre, but I don't think he was the one that was making the decisions. I think it would have been done by consensus of the board.
I think a lot of the process has been cocked up, but I also have a little bit of sympathy that he's been placed in an awful position.
Yeah.
Individually.
See, there's the question is where's Manchester United's responsibility start and finish with Mason Greenwood as an employee, which is no different. Like I employ people. Where does it finish? Because this is not related to football in any sense. This is his personal life. This is like, okay, you work here 9 to 5:30, Monday to Friday. What happens outside of those hours is your life. It's not my life as your employer to have any influence, control, or say over. With some caveats to that, like if it's criminal activity, then clearly it's in your employment contract that you're not going to be a criminal or convicted criminal, or you have to at least disclose it, and we can have a discussion about it. So this was obviously a crime that was committed, and we've talked about this before here at work. If there's something outside of your work life that's affecting you and having a negative impact on in any which way it is. My responsibility is to make sure that what is going on at work isn't making that worse, isn't affecting that. But in terms of giving you support for your personal situation, that's the responsibility of your friends or family or people outside of work. I can take responsibility for making sure that doesn't get worse. Now, the difference here, one is if it's a criminal activity, it can bleed across the lines. And the second thing is image rights and image overall, because footballers get paid, or a lot of footballers have part of their contract is image rights. They get paid for their image. So what you do outside of your hours, or how your image is in the public, is part of what you are employed to do. So you have to maintain a positive image. So it can't be a case that we pay you for the positive sides of your image, and if you do any negative things to affect your image, that's your personal life and that's not part of your work anymore, and that's actually, you've got to take care of it yourself. You can't have the positive and the negative. And so this is a situation where his negative image rights, if he's getting paid for the positivity, he should be punished for the negativity that situation has caused. And again, it bleeds the lines of what's outside the hours of 9 to 5:30. I know football is different hours. And the responsibility of Mason Greenwood, and what's the responsibility of Manchester United. And that's where it really bleeds the lines, and they are within their rights and should be taking further action, because it's not as clean cut as it might be in some employment situations.
So do you think they have a responsibility towards Greenwood, the football club, that is? Now?
Yes. I don't think they have a legal responsibility.
United have been at pains to stress this. Obviously, Greenwood had been with the club since he was 7. They've been at pains to stress this.
I don't think they have a legal responsibility to Mason Greenwood.
He's still under contract to them.
Well, they've mutually agreed to terminate or whatever. Once they've drawn the line that he is no longer part of Manchester United.
But they can't terminate his contract. He is technically under contract at Manchester United.
But do they have a responsibility and obligation to him?
He's an employee.
We're taking kids at such a young age and putting them through the machine and giving them so much money and responsibility. We've talked about how there needs to be better education for players coming through, and you see so many that struggle in their 20s because of fame and fortune and what have you. 100%, not just Manchester United, all clubs have a responsibility to young players and talent coming through to help them with that kind of thing. Like, I don't want to sound like disrespectful in terms of their education isn't the best, but they're focused so much on one thing with football, that they don't get necessarily the rounded view of everything else. So the clubs do have a massive responsibility, and in this situation, I think they do as well. It might not be legal, but it's definitely moral.
Do you think Greenwood should be allowed to continue his football career?
Do I think he should be allowed to? Not without some form of rehabilitation, recompense, something, some understanding of what's going on. I think if he's just lacing his boots up and off we go again, then I think it leaves a very sour taste. I do think he should be allowed to continue his football career, but
let's ask it a different way. Then perhaps let's put, because we're not Manchester United fans, let's put ourselves in a fan view of this. How do you feel if in what year we're in 23 at the 2026 World Cup, Mason Greenwood is called up to the England squad?
Still uncomfortable.
To be honest, can I be honest? My view would be much stronger than that. Yeah, my view would be completely unacceptable.
We don't know what happens between now and then. I would say, again, if he comes out with statements, explains what the situation is, shows rehabilitation, has tried to be a better person, integrated back into society, that's very different than if he just laces up his boots and turns up again. But yeah, it doesn't feel right.
You wouldn't want it though, would you?
It doesn't feel right. That's what I'm saying. I'm probably being a little bit polite with my uncomfortable.
You're a polite man.
I'm trying to. It's a difficult subject to talk about. Yeah. But yeah, it doesn't feel right. And I actually think even if he has been through a lot of this kind of stuff, it still doesn't feel right. Yeah. Yeah,
unfortunately not. I think, again, to reiterate, United came to their senses in the end, but under pressure from elsewhere. It's also interesting, one of the things we didn't really cover, we mentioned about kind of delay because the ladies playing at the World Cup. But it was also reported that they wanted to make an announcement earlier during the summer, but because of the tour to the USA, decided not to, because it would be, obviously, they had a consciousness. This is what's interesting about this. They had a consciousness over their timing constantly. Oh, it's not right to do it before they travel to USA. Oh, it's not right to do it while the ladies are playing. It's like there was a consciousness, something methodical almost, that they knew that the decision they were making was wrong.
The wrong one. Yeah, you do that, then you kick it forward, oh, figure it out later.
And the irony is there are certain things there, like the tour, the fact that the World Cup was going on, has essentially delayed a decision that has forced a U-turn. Otherwise, an announcement probably would have been made a few weeks ago that Greenwood was rejoining the first team. Yep. My opinion was always that basically what I was saying on Friday briefly was that I thought that if United did do that, they weren't prepared for what was going to happen and would have been forced into a U-turn anyway.
Yeah.
Because if they think the backlash, having come to this decision the way it has, was bad, imagine if they had announced, yeah, we're bringing him back in.
Yep.
It would have been major.
Mm.
So okay, they've come to the right decision. I think finally, in closing, the one thing I've realised over the last few days, looking into a few things, is that statistic of only 24% of domestic abuse cases get reported. For the thousands of people either listening or watching this, I suspect there's probably someone out there who is affected.
Yep.
And there are places that you can go to. We'll put in the bio here a load of contacts for both women and men. I have a friend of mine who was in a domestic abuse relationship in a marriage, and it was a man who was being abused by his wife. So that's obviously a lot rarer, but it does happen to men as well. We'll put a load of contact details in the bio for this podcast, both on the audio platforms and on YouTube, where you can speak out. As ever, my DMs are not open for people to send me screenshots of their FPL teams and ask me thoughts. It's for after things like this, where if people want to reach out, I'm certainly not an expert in this field, but if people want to speak to someone, maybe they feel like they know, then my DMs are open for those very reasons.
Exactly that. I think the most important takeaway from this is the conversation needs to be had about
and raise
this
awareness.
kind of thing. Whether or not you want to speak specifically about the Mason Greenwood situation because it is a difficult subject to talk about for a lot of people. The overarching conversation around domestic abuse and violence isn't one that should be avoided by anybody, I think, and definitely if even a handful of people now feel like they have the confidence to speak out about it, then that's what we want as an outcome, and for people to feel like they can talk about it and have that conversation for sure. As with so much that comes from football, if it can bleed out and have a bigger impact, then that's what we want to happen. So yeah, definitely links are all in the bio below, and obviously do DM James or message any of these organisations if you think you need help.
And comments are turned off for a reason on this one.
Yes, exactly that. There we go. We also had another topic in the People's Poll, which will be the Patreon podcast for today, James.
Also not controversial at all.
No, of course. So patrons, we've got that podcast talking about sponsorship and gambling coming at you later on today. And tomorrow is a Friday deadline. So we will be back to a world that revolves all around FPL tomorrow, because we'll have some decisions to make. So wherever you're listening to the podcast, make sure you're subscribed, give it a like, and we'll be back at you tomorrow. Stay safe. Ciao for now.
Thank you, everyone. Be nice to each other. Cue music, please, man child.